It's been an interesting last couple days for the Texans. Few pieces of news in the short term and long term that could impact the Texans. One massive, and it's going to be the most confusing of all. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. We're reacting to what's happened the last couple of days with the Texans. And before we do that, let's just go back to yesterday. Yesterday, the Texans announced their captains. They got 7. One of them, Stefon Diggs. The internet immediately goes nuts. You have Buffalo fans questioning it. You have non-Texans fans questioning it. Some Texans fans cussing and discussing it as well. An interesting piece of news that you didn't really think was that big of a deal. We'll break that down. But then you go to sleep. You wake up this morning and you find out that Davis Mills is getting a contract extension. 1 year, $5 million. How big of a deal is that? Some people had interesting takes on that. We'll get into that. And then perhaps the biggest news that impacts the Texans, not immediately, but pretty damn soon, Patrick Surtain becomes the highest paid DB of all time, 1 year out from Derek Stingley being eligible for an extension. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. Look out for post-game shows, breaking news videos throughout the day. Number one source for Texans digital content. Let's start with the Stefon Diggs news, though, as we go through these 3 pieces of news. The Stefon Diggs thing is interesting. Stefon Diggs named a team captain. We know about the whispers, the baggage that comes with Stefon Diggs in Buffalo. I'll be honest, everything I've seen, everything I've heard from Stefon Diggs and talking to his former teammates, I've talked to Brian Robinson, who was there with him in Minnesota. I've talked to Cole Beasley. We've had Cole Beasley on this show who was with him in Buffalo. And both of those guys, not only do they have good things to say about him, they've had great things to say about him. And I haven't really heard anything out of Buffalo in this offseason from actual teammates saying stuff about him. Now, business side of football, sometimes that can get the best of you. Stefon Diggs admitted that he was a little bit miserable in Buffalo last season. Maybe that can get the best of you. But the reality is, even last year with Stefon Diggs, with the production dropping, the Bills were perhaps a missed field goal away from beating the Chiefs. So it's not like they just completely fell off. If he was a locker room cancer, or if there was anything significant, you damn sure didn't see it on the field, because they were doing last season what they've been doing the seasons before. They were coming up short against the Chiefs, which is what went down. But I've never heard his former teammates say anything. And the other thing that I've noticed just watching all the practices is these guys seem to look up to Stefon Diggs, whether it's staying after practice, working out with him, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. They seem to look up to him. CJ Stroud was immediately working out with him in the offseason off of the field. So you've kind of seen that Stefon Diggs, like, these players gravitate towards Stefon Diggs. And the other thing is, if he is a problem right now, he's on a 1-year deal. He's trying to prove it, and he's on his best behavior. So as we start with the first of 3 pieces of news, is Stefon Diggs being a captain a big deal? I think it's a big deal in the Texans locker room and the culture that they're trying to create. And I'm sure D'Amico Ryans, when he speaks, will talk about it. And I'm sure the players will talk about it. But logistically, I don't think it's a big deal. And based on what I've actually seen visually, I don't think it's a big deal as well. I just explained the visual part of it, the visual aspect of it, where you see that the players are gravitate towards him. You see that CJ Stroud and him have chemistry. So that's visually. Vocally, from his teammates, you haven't heard anything bad. And this is direct contact with Cole Beasley, who was on this show, and Brian Robinson, who I texted whenever they brought him in. And neither one of those guys had anything bad to say about him. Logistically, though, it also makes sense as well. And I'll explain that. If you look at this Texans wide receiver room, Nico Collins has really 1 year of really, really good football experience. He's still a young guy. Nico Collins is heading into his 4th year. He's not really a vocal guy. Tank Dell's heading into his 2nd year. He missed nearly half the season last year. So these guys are still learning. They're still learning, trying to get to where they have a decade-plus long career like Stefon Diggs. The other receivers in that room are young as well. Xavier Hutchinson, John Mechie. Stefon Diggs has been in a situation where early on in his career, he has some success, some playoff success in Minnesota. He's been at the point in his career where the Texans are trying to get, where they're the biggest threat to the team that is favored to hoist that Lombardi. So logistically, if a receiver is going to be a captain, especially if he's on his best behavior, especially if these guys seem to look up to him, it just makes sense. It's not like you have an established veteran option outside of Stefon Diggs to be the guy. So it makes sense in many areas for Stefon Diggs to be a team captain. So I don't think it's a big deal. I think it's a big deal for the Texans, but I don't think it should surprise anyone at all. So that's the first piece of news. We went to bed last night. Stefon Diggs, a captain. He's one of 7. Okay, there's that. And then you wake up this morning when you're while you were asleep, and I'll be damned, Diana Rossini does it again. Davis Mills, he gets an extension. Davis Mills is going to be the backup quarterback for the Houston Texans this year. We know that Case Keenum's out, and we also know now that Davis Mills is going to be the backup quarterback next year. He signs a 1-year, $5 million extension. Diana Rossini and Jonathan Alexander got it at around the same time. So Davis Mills gets the 1-year extension. Let's kind of break this down because it might seem like a small deal, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. But I think it's a good thing for the Texans because I think Davis Mills last year was the best. I thought he was the best backup quarterback on the team last year, and I think that Davis Mills is the best backup quarterback this year. And I think this is a good market value. You can make a case that perhaps this is actually kind of a bargain. Davis Mills was thrown to the wolves when he was drafted by Nick Caserio in the 3rd round. If you draft a guy in the 3rd round 4 years ago and you feel comfortable enough for him to be your backup and get a second contract, even if it's a 1-year one, that makes it a pretty good contract. The fact that you don't have to deal with it, you don't have to worry about bringing in a backup quarterback. You know the guy's going to know your system. I think that's good. I also think this adds to the theory that we had in here a while ago that I asked Nico Ryans and Nick Caserio about last week. I think Case Keenum is officially on the staff next year. I think Case Keenum will officially be on the coaching staff next year. I think he's pretty much a de facto coach this year. And you can see that in training camp with him when he was out, like with the earpiece on, following around Bobby Slowick. I think if Bobby Slowick leaves and Gerard Johnson doesn't, then I think that Gerard Johnson is your offensive coordinator. Case Keenum's your quarterback coach. If both of them leave, I think there's a chance that he's still your quarterback coach, and maybe he has a chance to even be the offensive coordinator because this year would basically be like a year of coaching experience for him, and he's been an extra coach for a long time. So I think this impacts Case Keenum. I think I would bet that Case Keenum is the head coach of this squad, or not head coach, excuse me. D'Amico is the head coach. He will be on this coaching staff relatively soon. I saw Texans Cap, and Texans Cap is the guy I go to for all of these salary cap things. I kind of disagree with him. I texted him on the side, but this was his reaction to the Davis Mills contract, the 1-year, $5 million contract. He said he was shocked that Davis Mills would take this. And I'm actually shocked that he's shocked. That Texans Cap is shocked. And be sure to check out his channel. He's going to break this down today. He said there's a lot of angles with this Davis Mills thing. I'm looking forward to hearing those. But if you just look at what veteran backups that are more established starters than Davis Mills got last offseason, Jacoby Brissett got a 1-year, $8 million deal. Mariota got a 1-year, $6 million deal. Drew Lock got the exact same deal. And I think I think if you say that Davis Mills and Drew Lock are equal, I don't think you get too much pushback there. Flacco got 1 year, 4.5. Winston got 1 year, 4. I'm sure there were a lot of incentives in that. And then Jimmy G got 1 year, 4-ish million. So it seems like the market value, the 1 year, $5 million-ish range. Nobody's going to make Davis Mills their starter. There's a lot of value here. In a perfect world, he doesn't step on the field. He's just a resource for CJ Stroud. But I think it's a good move. I don't necessarily look at it as a bargain. I look at it as smart for Davis Mills, not dealing with any headaches. So he gets the 1 year, $5 million extension. Shout out to Rossini and Alexander for getting that. Then we had perhaps the biggest news of all, and this isn't a Texans transaction or decision, but we had history made this morning. Ian Rappaport and Schefter, they both had it around the same time. Patrick Surtain gets a 4-year, $96 million deal with $77.5 million guaranteed. This makes him the highest paid DB of all time. And immediately, because our mindset, our lifestyle on here is to localize it, you immediately start thinking about Derek Stingley. Shout out to Cody Stutes. I saw Cody Stutes reacted on this, and Cody Stutes said a healthy Derek Stingley can get into this neighborhood. Sauce Gardner will be in this neighborhood. Those will both be discussed next offseason. Cornerback money hasn't exploded like some positions, but these two will be expensive. And I agree with that. And I saw the great DJ Bieneme say this as well. Here's the thing, though, with Derek Stingley, and this is why there's a wild nature of Derek Stingley. We know Derek Stingley, when he is on the field, he is elite. We know this. We know what Derek Stingley can do when he is on the football field. He is elite. Now, in his first 2 seasons, he's missed 14 games. Now, we can go back to year one and say, okay, well, they weren't necessarily trying to win. Maybe he could have come back a little bit early. I don't know if that's true or not, but we can say that. But he's missed 14 games in his first 2. Surtain in 3 years has missed 1. Sauce Gardner in 2 years has missed 1. So that's going to be the difficulty of the Derek Stingley negotiation. Now, some will say, well, if he stays healthy, he can prove it and he can get that type of money. My question would be, if I'm Nick Caserio and I'm having to make these tough decisions, and the decisions are a lot tougher now because on top of Stingley, the year after that, you're going to have CJ Stroud, you're going to have Will Anderson, you're going to have Dell. You're going to have to make those decisions. Do you look at 1 year as an outlier, or do you look at it as the new norm? We know when Derek Stingley's out there, Derek Stingley is elite. But when you're pointing to Patrick Surtain and you're pointing to Sauce Gardner, if I'm pushing back, and it's going to be Mulligetta, so it's going to be a tough negotiation. He's going to get what he's worth. But if you're pushing back, you're going to have to bring up the fact that he's missed games. Now, if he misses games again this year, maybe in a crazy way, it's kind of a break because you get a bargain. You get a guy like if he misses, I don't know, a handful of games like he has the last couple of years, do you get an elite corner at a bargain? That'll be interesting. On the other side of things, eventually the Texans are going to have to make tough decisions as the decision to pay CJ Stroud creeps closer and closer, because that's where things completely change. That's why Buffalo's having to make some of the moves they're making, and we see teams around the league having to make those types of moves. Eventually, you're going to have to let some good players walk. What if Kamari Lassiter establishes himself as really good? Is Derek Stingley that first tough decision? Who knows? But the nature of this deal is going to be wild, because even if he performs at a high level over the course of an entire season, is that an outlier? Is that the new norm? Who knows? But it's going to be an interesting negotiation, and it's going to be kind of the pre-fight Mulligetta versus Caserio / Cal McNair on behalf of Derek Stingley. Before the year after that, when they really have to make the decision, it's Mulligetta on behalf of CJ Stroud. Make me the highest paid quarterback in the league. And that's kind of a no-brainer. So it's really, really interesting. It's been a really wild 2 days. It's going to be a really fun few days up to the opening game. Post-game show right here. I got you covered right here. Texans are actually going to they're going to practice today.
We in here talking about practice.
We'll hear from CJ Stroud. We'll hear from Nico Ryans, and we'll keep you posted. But we're always localizing around here. The Stefon Diggs thing, logistically, not really that big of a deal. And visually, really not that big of a deal when it comes to being a team captain. I'm sure Nico will be proud of it. The Davis Mills thing, good. You got your insurance policy. Hopefully you never have to use it. And I think it was about market value, although I am intrigued to hear what Texans Cap has to say about it. He's always the go-to for that type of thing. And then the Patrick Surtain, this is where the big money happens. We ain't talking about 1 year, $5 million. We're talking about elite corners getting paid elite corner bread with all the variables. We got you covered on everything that happens with the Houston Texans. Be sure to swarm the like button. Be sure to subscribe.
Swarm.
Be sure to like. Be sure to ride along. Be sure to always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. It is game week, baby. Let's eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the Locker Room on YouTube. You know what it is.